Through our PIs right now, we do have some evidence that Kim Porter may have been poisoned and murdered.
The conversation regarding Kim Porter continues. More discussion over her death and the accusation that there wasn't a proper investigation. We're going to catch you up to speed on this aspect of the Sean Combs story and bring back on forensic death investigator Joseph Scott Morgan to get
the moment the truth erupts, everything around the figure at the center begins to collapse in real time. The empire that once looked invincible, untouchable, fortified by decades of influence and intimidation.
Sean Diddy Combs on federal racketeering and sex trafficking charges. There is this renewed interest in all aspects of his life, all the people in his life. And that includes, of course, Kim Porter, Combs' ex-girlfriend, who tragically died in her Los Angeles home back in November of 2018. Officers reportedly found the 47-year-old unresponsive. She was pronounced dead. Now, initially, an autopsy was performed on Porter the next day, and according to the Los Angeles County Medical Examiner's Office, the cause of death was deferred pending additional tests. But then you fast forward to January 2019, and the office then concludes that she died of lobar pneumonia. So the manner of death was listed as natural as opposed to something like homicide, and she'd apparently gone into cardiac arrest. Now, it was reported that she had been battling flu-like symptoms in the days leading up to her death, that there were water bottles, sports drinks, Pedialyte. They were found in her bedroom. Days after her death, Sean Combs commented publicly about Porter's death, writing on Instagram, "For the last 3 days, I've been trying to wake up out of this nightmare, but I haven't. I don't know what I'm going to do without you, baby. I miss you so much. Today, I'm going to pay tribute to you. I'm going to try and find the words to explain our unexplainable relationship. We were more than best friends. We were more than soulmates. We were some other S. And I miss you so much. Super black love." Combs would reportedly tell Essence magazine the following year, "One night I was checking on her and she was like, 'Puffy, take care of my babies.' She actually said that to me before she died." Now, he's talked about Porter a lot over the years. For example, in 2023, Combs claimed that Porter was the inspiration behind his Love album, Off the Grid. He even dedicated a song to her. Now, despite all of this, there have been rumors. There have been unsubstantiated rumors about Kim Porter's death, about what actually happened. And remember, this is a couple that first started dating in the 90s. They had an on-again, off-again relationship. They went through a custody battle over Christian, the son that they had together. They reconcile. They have twin daughters together, Delilah Starr, Jesse James. Combs reportedly cheated on Porter, though. They broke up in 2007, but by all accounts, Porter and Combs seemed to remain close, to be on good terms as parents until her death. And by the way, a little side note, Porter was actually mentioned relatively recently in one of the sexual assault lawsuits that was filed against Sean Combs. This concerned April Lampros, and she claimed that one night in 1996, Combs had forced her and Porter to take ecstasy and have sex with each other as Combs watched and touched himself. And she said afterwards that Combs even invited her to Porter's birthday party. Now, Lampros would also allege that Porter got angry and was resentful of her and helped get her fired from the bar where Lampros was working. So it was really interesting to hear that. But like I said, there have been theories popping up, particularly on Reddit, about Porter's real cause of death, about whether or not she was killed. And one of those people who seems to believe that there is more to the story is Albie Shore. This is Porter's ex. His real name is Albert Joseph Brown. They shared a son together named Quincy. Well, after Combs' arrest on federal sex crimes charges, Brown posted on Instagram, "In a nutshell, Kimberly was allegedly taken from us because she was set on course to accomplish what Mrs. Cassie Ventura did by igniting the bonfire which brings us here today." Ventura, of course, is Combs' ex-girlfriend who filed that initial sexual assault, sex trafficking lawsuit against Sean Combs last year. It spiraled into multiple other lawsuits and arguably spiraled into these charges that he's now facing today. And Brown wrote, "I'm writing this post to formally request an investigation into an entire group of individuals who worked at or around..."
Suddenly starts cracking from the inside, not because of rivals, not because of lawsuits, not because of enemies clawing at the gates. No, this time the destruction comes from the most unexpected source imaginable: the daughters. The ones who were always quiet. The ones the public rarely saw speak. The ones who grew up behind the gold-plated walls the world thought were paradise. They're the ones who finally step forward, and what they unleash is nothing short of catastrophic. When their voices finally rise, the world stops. They don't come out swinging for spectacle. They don't scream for attention. They speak with a calm, heavy truth that carries so much weight. It feels like the air goes still. Every word they share slices through the illusions that held the empire together for years. And each piece of their truth falls like a stone into the world's collective stomach, sending shockwaves everywhere, in every room, in every corner of the industry, behind every door where people once whispered their suspicions but chose silence out of fear or convenience. The daughters start from the beginning, not to dramatize, but because the reality is already dramatic enough. They describe growing up in a world that looked perfect from the outside but felt
Found the residence of Miss Kimberly Porter, and he called her death a tragic murder. Now, interestingly, there are reports that Albie Shore has even taken more security measures after asking for an investigation. In fact, he was presented an award at the American Liver Foundation's National Legacy Gala in New York, and in his speech, he says, "We even have Homeland Security in the building. Detective Jackson, good to see you." Not entirely sure what he's talking about, what he's referencing, but considering it was Homeland Security that raided Sean Combs' properties in LA and Miami and collected all that evidence that federal prosecutors are now using in their criminal case against him, interesting comment to make. Now, Gene Deal, this is Combs' former bodyguard, spoke on the Art of Deal podcast about this, and he said, "You got to realize, man, Kim's death wasn't even investigated." He went on to say, "How is it that there was no electronic products or gadgets around Kim? Be her laptop missing, her cell phone's missing, everything is missing, that she could get in touch with her little girls if they're not at home, or her friends or family. All that's missing. How is it that? All that's missing. How is it that?" The detectives didn't even examine Porter's body where she passed away. And Deal emphasized, if that is true, that case needs to be reopened. And also in regards to the idea that she got a massage right before her death, he also said, who gives somebody a massage when they get pneumonia? Deal also apparently took issue with the alleged timing of buying her gold casket. He said, how you order a gold casket 2 months before somebody dies. And he even addressed Albie Shore beefing up his security. Al ain't no fool. He's smart by getting extra security. Now, with all of this as a backdrop, the last time we talked about Kim Porter on Sidebar is when a book was published on Amazon. It was entitled Kim's Lost Words, A Journey for Justice from the Other Side. It is allegedly a memoir from Kim Porter herself detailing her relationship with Sean Combs, but it reportedly contains typos, shocking claims, some are saying even inaccurate statements. In fact, Quincy Brown, Christian, Jesse Delilah Combs, they wrote in a joint statement on Instagram, "We have seen so many hurtful and false rumors circulating about our parents, Kim Porter and Sean Combs' relationship, as well as about our mom's tragic passing, that we feel the need to speak out. Claims that our mom wrote a book are simply untrue. She did not. And anyone claiming to have a manuscript is misrepresenting themselves." And by the way, even Combs authorized his attorney Erica Wolf to release a statement on his behalf regarding the new book, stating, "The Kim Porter memoir is fake. It is also offensive, a shameless attempt to profit from tragedy. Chris Todd has no respect for Miss Porter or her family, who deserve better. Unlike the fabrications in his sickening memoir, it is an established fact that Miss Porter died of natural causes. May she rest in peace." And Albie Shore reportedly sent a cease and desist letter to Amazon as well. And Chris Todd, by the way, he's the author. And when we say memoir, we have to be clear here. There's no information verifying that Porter actually authored these writings or authorized a book to be written by her or anybody else at any point. And even the author really couldn't confirm whether these are actually Porter's words or not, but he seems to believe it's true, claiming that Porter created the information herself on a flash drive, which Todd says she gave to her friends prior to her death. Again, her family, loved ones deny this, but either way, interesting to think about. And I sat down with Chris Todd to talk about this, and this is some of what he had to say.
Through our PIs right now, we do have some evidence that Kim Porter may have been poisoned and murdered. We need to listen to the people that are online, even these online.
Felt like walking through glass behind the scenes. A world where every smile was staged, every family moment was rehearsed, every celebration was a performance designed to maintain an image that was, in reality, suffocating them. They talk about the tension that never left the air in the house, the kind that made everyone speak in carefully measured tones. the kind that made them tiptoe even in their own rooms, the kind that made them learn how to read expressions faster than other kids learned to read books. They grew up interpreting moods like survival signals. One wrong move and the energy in the room could shift instantly. One of them describes nights that felt endless, nights when the shouting wasn't loud, but sharp, controlled, cutting, the kind of anger that doesn't explode, it seeps. It coils around the atmosphere until everyone feels it sitting on their chest. They recall moments when they wanted to speak up, to defend themselves, to ask simple questions, but something in the room always forced them backwards. They talk about the emotional pressure, the expectation to be perfect, to smile on command, to represent the brand, not themselves. They weren't raised as kids.
Sleuths, the bloggers, a lot of information comes out from this kind of community. And there's talk of toxins being in her system at first. It was called deferred at first, then it was changed. It's disturbing. It's dark. It's sad. This is an abused woman telling her story. When I first read the whole thing, I only had a couple pages at first. Now, as for the tapes, I've been told that I can have access to the tapes.
What are the tapes? First, start there. What tapes are you talking about?
The big ones.
You're talking about sex tapes.
Yeah, but with very famous people.
Okay, so talk to us about what you were told about the tapes.
That if I pass the test, they trust me, I will be the one to do it.
Who's they?
The sources and the people around the community of Kim and Diddy.
And I should tell you that after our interview, Amazon responded to all of this blowback by removing Chris Todd's book from its store. So with all of that in mind, let's revisit this, shall we? I want to bring in forensic death investigator from Jacksonville State University, Joseph Scott Morgan, host of the Body Bags podcast. I encourage everybody to check it out. Who doesn't want to hear the soothing voice of Joseph Scott Morgan for a prolonged period of time? And by the way, we're very lucky because Joseph told us that this is the first recording he is doing from his new studio. And gosh, Joseph, you look phenomenal.
Oh, well, thank you, Jesse. It's good to hear that from you. A person so stylish as yourself and with the world's best hair, of course.
Well, that's very kind
unlike
of you.
mine that is graying and not thinning, but it's gray nonetheless. But
It looks
thanks
good.
for having
It
me
looks
on.
good.
It's always a pleasure. Well, thank you. Thank you, buddy. I appreciate it.
So listen, I'm happy to have you on. We had you on months ago talking about this. There have been these kind of interesting developments since we last spoke. First, if you could just tell us, again, let's set the stage. Do you have any reason to believe that Kim Porter did not die of lobar pneumonia, and whether Porter could have been poisoned in a way to mimic those symptoms?
Wow, that's a very highly sophisticated premise. I think putting out that she could have been poisoned in some way, certainly something that would be undetectable. What I can tell you is that there was quite a bit of pathology with her autopsy. And, you know, you'd mentioned just a moment ago that she had died of lobar pneumonia. For folks that don't know, just a brief little primer here. Our lungs are comprised of lobes. Okay. So hence lobar pneumonia. The right lung has 3 lobes. The left lung has 2. All right. And the reason you have 2 is on the left is because the heart takes up the space. It kind of overlies the lung on that side. Now, her lungs, just so that I have the numbers right, to give you an idea of what we're dealing with here, her lungs were 850 grams for the left. That's the one with only 2 lobes. And then the right lung was 900 grams. Now, that might not mean much to most of the listening public, but I can tell you this. For a woman in particular, alarm bells kind of go off if you get anything that's like...
They were raised as pieces of a polished image, accessories to a public persona that cared more about reputation than reality. Every time they felt scared, confused, or overwhelmed, they were told to keep their heads up because people are watching. The world's gaze mattered more than their feelings. As they speak, you can hear years of silence cracking open. They reveal moments when they felt invisible, Moments when they cried behind closed doors because the atmosphere in the house was too heavy to process. Moments when they questioned whether they mattered to the person who demanded loyalty from everyone but never offered vulnerability in return. The industry reacts immediately, and the panic spreads like wildfire. People who once acted like loyal supporters suddenly retreat. Phones ring nonstop behind the scenes. Strategies fall apart. Lawyers start reviewing every potential implication of the daughter's words. Crisis teams scramble because this is the one thing no amount of spin can fix. When the truth comes from the inside, from the children, there is no defense strong enough to stop the fallout.
Like up in the upper 400 range, we're talking about the weight of these lungs is desperately heavy. Not only that, but when the lungs were dissected at autopsy, they had this kind of purulent fluid that came out, and it's just kind of a polite way of saying pus. She had an ongoing infection. Now, I've investigated a lot of deaths over the course of my career in New Orleans and Atlanta, and I have yet to work a case where someone was able to introduce an agent into someone's system that wound up causing a pneumonia and leading to their death. However, I think one of my biggest questions is, because this is not something that just happened overnight, Jesse. This is a prolonged event. You had a physician, a house call physician, and that's the way they're termed apparently, that was coming out to administer treatment to Miss Porter. How in the world this could have been missed, I have no idea. I have had people that are suffering from medical conditions that are in and of themselves lethal. If particularly pneumonia is very dangerous, and left to go untreated. And when I say untreated, she was given like a Z-Pack, which is kind of a broad spectrum antibiotic, which a lot of people receive. They give her an IV that is kind of vitamin infused, lots of fluid bottles, they said, trying to do electrolyte replacement. But once you get this kind of bacterial infection that's going on, and you get to the point where your lungs are this heavy and you're producing pus at this point in time, I think my big question is, was this neglect? Because, this kind of passive thing that's going on, I don't see anything at this point in time that would indicate that she had some kind of trauma. And if somebody has an indication here, and I'm speaking to those individuals that are insinuating that she was in some way poisoned, my advice is get in contact with the authorities. Let them know this information if you are truly invested in the case relative to solving it. Because you can say all kinds of things, but if you have hard scientific evidence that this occurred, then let us know. I also take exception to this idea that's being thrown out there, Jesse, that her death was not investigated. Now, you mentioned electronic devices, and that's all fine and good, but when you say her death was not investigated, what precisely is meant by that statement? Because I got to tell you, there are a lot of people out there, cases that happen every single day, Jesse, that the medical examiner never puts their hands on those remains. They're never autopsied. They're probably cases, in the best set of circumstances, it'd be preferable to do an autopsy. She had an autopsy performed, a thorough autopsy. Now, I can't speak to how thoroughly her tissues were examined afterwards, but she had a lot of stuff going on with her systemically that would give you an indication that she had some serious problems going on. And just let me throw this out there to you as well. Her system was not, her metabolism was not working within normal range.
The daughters continue, their voices steadier now. They talk about betrayal, not of dramatic actions, but of absence, of being physically present but emotionally unreachable, of receiving gifts instead of affection, of being surrounded by luxury but starving for stability. They describe how confusing it was to grow up in a world where strangers saw their life as a dream, while they felt trapped inside a constant emotional fog. One moment they share shakes the entire room. They talk about a day when they tried to have a normal conversation, a moment of vulnerability, hoping for understanding. Instead, They were met with indifference. The kind of coldness that doesn't just hurt, it scars. They described learning that emotions weren't allowed in the house unless they fit the script. Anything else was seen as weakness. Anything else was punished with silence, distance, or pressure. They reveal how rare it was to feel truly safe. How every decision felt like walking through a maze filled with invisible traps. How they kept their real thoughts locked away because the consequences of honesty were too unpredictable. They became experts in emotional survival, constantly adjusting themselves to fit whatever version of themselves was
across the country, where the primary or sole conviction was for a violation of 18 U.S.C. 2421, the defendants who were not charged with running a prostitution business have been released pending sentencing. And then Combs' attorneys make another argument for why Combs' conditions are exceptional. And it's about him being locked up at the MDC. They say that a district court judge in the Southern District, in another case, basically said how bad the MDC is. As Judge Furman noted, the state of affairs at MDC is unacceptable. In so noting, Judge Furman concluded that the conditions in the MDC qualify as exceptional reasons under the statute justifying, and this was the defendant in this case, Chavez's continuing release. Judge Furman found that the conditions at the MDC are, quote, dreadful in many respects, but three warrant particular emphasis. 1. Continued reports of inordinate periods of lockdown. 2. Claims that the facility provides inadequate and or substantially delayed necessary medical care, a particular risk in this case. And 3. General issues about the conditions at the facility. These conditions have not abated in Mr. Combs' detention at the facility. As the court is aware, during Mr. Combs' incarceration at the MDC, the facility was subject to an interagency sweep that was designed to achieve our shared goal of maintaining a safe environment for both our employees and the incarcerated individuals housed at MDC Brooklyn. They're actually quoting what the rationale was. In other words, there is a significant issue at the MDC related to the safety of employees and incarcerated individuals that require outside law enforcement action from multiple agencies to address. Importantly, MDC, as a jail, has a significant law enforcement presence within its walls 24 hours per day that are equipped with investigatory and often unregulated authority. Thus, the requirement of outside law enforcement agencies to ensure safety within the MDC is an admission that serious violence, mayhem, and chaos is occurring within the MDC that requires more than a Band-Aid raid, but rather surgery. Indeed, we are aware of ongoing threats of violence and actual violence in the facility such that Mr. Combs' safety is constantly at risk. And they go on to argue, though Mr. Combs has been a model inmate for his nearly year-long period of confinement, the violent conditions are still very much a concern for Mr. Combs and is an unnecessary confinement risk given the clear precedent of multiple similarly situated Mann Act convictions where defendants were released on conditions. Now, the government, by the way, would probably disagree with that statement of him being a model inmate. Remember when they accused Combs of trying to arrange three-way phone calls and buying the use of other inmates' phone privileges to try to make sure the government wasn't listening in, that he was having these private conversations, that he was allegedly trying to contact witnesses in the case, that he allegedly orchestrated a birthday campaign to help his public image while he was locked up. So if we hear a government response, I'm sure they're going to say something about that. Then the defense highlights he's not a risk of flight, he's not a danger to the community, which, by the way, I think are real key points here. But they seem to echo a lot of the same arguments that they have already stated to the court. And remember, they haven't been successful in the past. That he voluntarily came to New York last year to surrender himself to authorities, that he gave up his passport to his attorneys 6 months before his arrest, paid off his mortgage on his Miami home so it was free and clear for him to stay at while out on bond. He was just acquitted of the most serious charges that he was facing, which, by the way, carried decades, if not life in prison. That he's not a risk of flight. That's the basic argument. Now, when it comes to the danger argument, that is key. Why?
Expected that day. And the world? It listens in shock, because the daughters shatter every assumption people once had. The glamorous lifestyle, the mansions, the luxury trips, the media appearances, it all means nothing when placed next to the emotional reality they reveal. The truth they share exposes a hollowness that no mansion can fill and no fame can hide. Behind the scenes, insiders whisper that the person at the center of all this is spiraling, completely overwhelmed, unable to understand how everything unraveled so fast. They were used to controlling the narrative for years. They were used to commanding loyalty, shaping perception, and managing their public image meticulously. But this time, the story isn't theirs to control. The daughters have taken their power back, and the truth they release is unstoppable. The empire begins to crumble visibly, partnerships freeze, brand deals halt, creative projects fall apart, public support disappears. People who once praised the figure at the center now distance themselves with lightning speed. No one wants to be associated with the downfall that is clearly inevitable. The daughters reveal more. They talk about isolation, how they were sheltered, not for protection, but to keep them from speaking, seeing, or questioning. They talk about how they learned to perform happiness because real conversations were discouraged, how they felt pressured to present themselves as grateful, blessed, privileged, when inside they felt like prisoners of their own image. They describe years when emotional wounds went untreated because acknowledging them was considered taboo, times when they needed help but were told to stay strong instead, times when they felt their voices didn't matter. They describe becoming shadows in their own lives. Each revelation shreds another layer from the public persona their father cultivated so fiercely. The world watches the unraveling with wide eyes because the collapse isn't coming from a scandal. It isn't coming from an accusation. It's coming from truth, raw, steady, and emotionally devastating. The daughters talk about the moment they finally decided to speak out. They say it wasn't rage, it wasn't revenge, it was exhaustion. Decades of burying reality had become too heavy to carry. They realized silence was no longer protecting them, it was destroying them. And when the truth became the only relief, they stepped forward and let it all out. Their decision becomes the turning point. The empire that once stood tall now stands exposed, fragile. Behind closed doors, the reaction is desperate. The person at the center of this tries to reach them, tries to control the story, tries to manipulate the narrative, but it's too late. The daughters are no longer under the shadow they once feared. They've grown, healed, and found their strength, and once they opened their mouths, they made sure the world heard everything they had been forced to swallow for years. The daughters aren't destroying their father. They're freeing themselves. And the world watches as the empire he built collapses under the weight of the truth he never thought they'd tell.